humans from apes. There is absolutely no peer-reviewed scientific evidence whatsoever of macroevolution anywhere in the scientific community. I saw a thing yesterday that says that they believe that dry worm tunneling could prove the Big Bang, stellar, could prove the Big Bang, but basically don't have an explanation still, even in 2025, that makes any scientific sense of how everything in the universe was this big and it exploded. So they're literally ever seeking, ever learning, but never able to come to the knowledge. That's good. So if someone asks you, what do you believe? You just say, well, which kind of evolution? You talk about macro, you talk about stellar, you talk about cosmic, you talk about chemical. That's a good way to refute and kind of reduce their claims. We're looking here again, I just want to go back a little bit at these folds in the Earth's crust that are evident everywhere. Let's see if I can go right back to this is the one in West Virginia. I think it's amazing. I don't know if I've ever seen this. I imagine this is the major highway, interstate that goes over there, right? I feel like I've seen this somewhere, but maybe never really paid attention to it. But what an incredible, where is it? Do you know where it's at?
Maybe 48 quarter inch.
Yeah, I know it's over to one of those big cities. Tess would let's go over to West Virginia, the big city for the day, and I would just go. But isn't that just amazing? It just begs the question, and if all this stuff was deposited over millions of years, I mean, this is the clearest thing ever. How come it's curved? If it was deposited over millions of years, it would just be flat. Gravity would do its thing, but clearly this is just gushy mud. Look at that. It's amazing. Just fold it over, probably by the geological processes from cavitation and the destruction of the land masses by water, and the water slowly receded. This stuff just got frozen in time, quite literally. You can still do this in a laboratory. It's not very hard. Here's another one in Crystal Cove State Park. Look at that one. It's not even curved in a circle. It's like in every which way. It's almost like it's following the patterns of the water. There's a close-up of it. Remember, when they're talking about layers of millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years, they're saying that they find fossils in these different layers, and that proves that the layers are millions of years old, and that thereby proves that evolution is true, but it's not. Look at that. It's just folded over. You won't find them talking about this much. Geologists will talk about, how there's plates and they shift and these things can happen under intense pressure, and then that proves it. But it really doesn't. It's just circular reasoning. Here's one in San Juan Capistrano, California, just way up the side, almost like it was pushed by a wave. After the flood, the surface would dry out, leaving mud that was soft, and that water would tend to come out the sides, like here in the Grand Canyon, and the mud shrinks as it dries, creating depressions. Over time, those sink in, and eventually they connect in with the main canyon. You can see this is a picture of someone flying over the Grand Canyon, almost like it just collapses. I used to live in a town called Fort Bragg, California, and right next to it's a pretty famous place called Mendocino. Anybody remember the old TV show Murder, She Wrote? I don't know if you remember that from back in the 80s. Jessica, whatever. My mom used to love that show. But anyway, it was set in that town, and these towns had these big cliffs that would just drop right into the ocean, and you had to be careful at what they called the headlands. If you were out there, looking at the Pacific Ocean and checking things out, there were times where that softer rock would collapse, and you could end up dropping down into it or dropping into the Pacific. It happened many times. Many people have been, unfortunately, killed doing that. So this is just the same thing. It's just a little depression. We know that the Earth has a crust, and we know that underneath the crust of the Earth is magma, and that's pushing up, and that's also causing these layers. But the layers would crack if they were solid. Okay, so that will not explain it. All right, here's the next question. How did the kangaroos get to Australia? People say there's no kangaroos on any other continent on the Earth. They try to use this as an excuse. Well, the mountains rose up. It's pretty simple. And the water rushed into low places, but the oceans were smaller after the flood. There's a lot more water up here on these continents that eventually found its way back into the ocean. In fact, it's still doing it to this day. We have lakes and rivers that are still flowing into the oceans. But during the flood, these big lakes were huge. They covered states, massive areas. And those areas eventually emptied into the oceans. And all the water from the flood went down and followed gravity and these land bridges were gone. Let's look at some of this. There was a time, probably, in the last few thousand years, where that was the post-flood beach. There's the British Isles. There's, Great Britain and Ireland and Wales and Scotland and all that stuff. That was probably still land. As the water started pouring in there, it filled it all up. You can see it from space. Here's a picture from space. You can see the shallow water. I don't think you're going to go down and get your watch if you drop it, but it's still very shallow. It's not very deep in comparison. Here's another one of the Pacific Ocean. They call this the Aleutian Trench. That Aleutian chain of islands that extends way out into the northern Pacific. You can see where this shallow part is significantly higher than the rest of the Pacific Basin. Look at that. Even a secular scientist believed that there was a land bridge. Here's another good picture of it. You can see there where the water levels just kind of drop off. People, and this is accepted by evolutionists, by secular scientists. They believe that's how people got to North America. Well, a lot of them believe that they just basically, hey, there's food. Let's go get the food. That'd be me for sure. I'd already be in South America by the time. There's better food down there. Let's keep going. I'd just chase after those buffaloes. Tasty. Okay. You can also see it in the United States. There's, a picture of the United States topographically. You're talking about the mountains and the flat and the plains. But at some point, the water was probably up to there. And initially, at least. Isn't it funny, too, how these mountain chains follow the shores? Clearly, they're connected somehow. I think we all know how. If the oceans were just 10% deeper, this is what America would look like. Well, it wouldn't have red stripes, but there would be no land there. We'd all be, well, I guess we'd be okay. We could go up to the mountains, go to Pastor's old home. It'd be an island chain. How about that? The West Virginia Islands. Can you imagine? The lower ocean levels here in North America, you can kind of see off the Atlantic coast, they would have extended way out from the Carolinas and from Florida. That would all be beach line. Look at the Gulf of Mexico. Way out there. It would have been like farmland in Pensacola for you guys, right? And here's an interesting one as well. Let's look at that. You see, this is the Mississippi cone. Right there. This is all the sediment that has since poured out of the Mississippi River and all the tributaries into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, if that's the case, and we can measure the sediment level, we can actually say, okay, we can see it's getting X amount bigger, because it does a lot of emptying. As I mentioned before, why are the oceans not saltier? Okay, because we know that increases salinity. It should be like crazy salty in the oceans. And how come that's not bigger? How come there's a Gulf? It should be filled by now if it's been millions of years, at the rate of water that's rushing out of it. Okay? Oh, let's go. New Orleans and Fort Walton Bays are about 7 feet deep in most parts of it. Not that deep. Lower water levels meant that all the continents were connected for the first few hundred years. Populations just spread out all over the globe. I don't know why they left. I don't know why Japheth went north. I don't know why Shem went out to the west, but they didn't get along. I don't know. Maybe it was like, you smell. I want to get out of here, or something. I don't know. They just said, I need some land. I need some space. Like everybody had that child that just leaves the house, teenager. I'm getting out of here. I want to get some space. That's what happened. They just left. Okay. Nowadays, they don't leave. But anyway, they just spread out across the globe wherever there was land. And you can see down there in the South Pacific that a lot of that stuff probably was still connected to Australia at one point. Now, why is that important about the kangaroos? Well, look, if you don't have big claws and big strong muscles and big teeth, and you're kind of like a tiny little animal, where are you going to go? You're going to run away from the predators, right? These marsupials, koala bear, they're adorable, but I wouldn't use it as a guard animal in your house. It's just going to sit in there and look at you. The wombat, the kangaroo, these are not predators. They're just going to keep moving. So a lot of animals that we consider livestock, they can't defend themselves. Buffalo, cow, they just keep moving in herds. The herd mentality. We need to get away from the predators. They're going to take off old crippled Elmer down here. Crippled Elmer. And what does the Elmer always do? He always goes down to the safe watering hole, right? Come on, man. Like seriously. That's where the lion's going to get him. And what are the other animals are like, oh, Elmer's hurt. Should we hurt him? Should we help him? Nah, just leave him. I'll go down to the safe watering hole and get killed by a lion. The smart ones are moving now. They're moving. They're going to other places. Caspian Sea. Anybody ever been there? I doubt it. But that sea was probably landlocked because it ran out of places that it could empty out. So there are some landlocked lakes, or there are some lakes that have been able to sustain themselves. Great Lakes are a prime example, but it was probably connected to the Aral and the Black Sea at some point. Very interesting stuff. So these animals just kept moving. That's what happened to the kangaroos. Why the kangaroos only there? Because they just kept on moving. There's probably a lot of animals that survived the flood that we may not even know about that just got eaten up. Okay. The next question is, well, then why do we even have a continental shelf? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's a picture of the continental shelf. You can kind of see where it just drops off right there. Okay, it's kind of a shallow place. I think it's a wonderful gift from God, if you think about it. There's been fishermen throughout the history of human beings, and some of the apostles were fishermen. Continental shelf is almost like a breadbasket if you didn't think about it. It's really, it's a lot of fish out there. I think it's a real blessing from the Lord that we have the continental shelf. A lot of stuff out there, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. The Bible says in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It says about 4,400 years ago there was a flood, okay? And during the last few months of the flood, the plates from the continental shelf, they fractured and they shifted. The thin spots sank down. We know that the continental shelf, the crust of the earth, is actually thinner in the ocean and thicker on the continents, and other places lifted up to make mountains. Okay? And the runoff causes erosion. We see it today. The earth is smooth. In fact, if it was a cue ball, like you play pool with, if it was like a cue balls, we'd have huge mountains, because a cue ball, as smooth as it is in comparison, has massive bumps. The earth is very, very smooth. If you look way, way far away, you can't even see Mount Everest. So look at these ridge lines right here. You can't even see it. Just looks nice and smooth. You can see the mountains in the United States right there. You can kind of see it in this picture, but it's not that pronounced from space. But what happens? What happens with these shelves? Well, some of it's also being created by the runoff. You have this cycle here. You have condensation and precipitation, okay? That hits the mountains. This is, basic science. And it runs down groundwater, and it goes into the oceans, and it evaporates. The continental shelves provide us a method for fast evaporation of water, which allows us to have crops. Everything God does is perfect. Everything he does is absolutely 100% perfect. So that could be one reason why God designed it this way. I forgot why I had this one in here. Okay, yeah. Just talking about the height of different places on the earth. Minneapolis is only 670 feet higher than New Orleans. So you can see that big watershed. God's almost created this whole water collection system for us so that we can have crops and we can have food. I can only imagine what it was like in the pre-flood conditions when water literally came up out of the ground and watered crops. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? So Minneapolis is about 1,150 miles away from New Orleans. See it right there? And look at that Mississippi River. It goes all the way down. It's a 670-foot drop. That is not a lot. That gives you a lot of opportunity to harvest that water and use it, Praise the Lord for that. A 7-inch drop every mile. If a dam were built across the Grand Canyon, a large lake would form. Did you know that? It absolutely would. You could put a dam right there and you would have a massive lake. Erosion is an amazing thing. We got that big old Hoover Dam out there. I've seen it from, anybody ever been to the Hoover Dam? You have? I read that it's still drying, the concrete. Is that true? You ever heard that? Who knows? I don't know. It's pretty amazing stuff. But there's evidence of post-flood erosion. There's the Colorado River. And remember, we said the Colorado River empties out in the Grand Canyon where the elevation is actually higher. So it disproves evolution right there. You take that C5 Galaxy flying over that's the largest stratolifter in the Air Force, or it was at the time, flying right over the Grand Canyon right there. That is a massive cut in the ground. But when you look at it, it doesn't look any different than if you were to just drop water in a sandbox and mix it all up. It really doesn't. Here's some other beautiful pictures of it. Look at that one. Gorgeous. It's like God gave us this amazing topography to remind us of his mercy and his love for us, that he would never again flood the earth. And for thousands of years, people looked at this, and this is what they believed. It wasn't like they thought like people do today. This was just common knowledge in their minds. I mean, look at that. Look at how it just flows around. Obviously, it was cut very quickly. Beautiful stuff, and yet we just allow our children to be taught that it's actually proof of evolution. So when you see a long river, a looping, meandering river, it's typical of old age and a low slope, they say. They say that's what it means. And that steep characteristics of young rivers are of young rivers and a high slope. So if that's the case, then if that big, deep Grand Canyon, wouldn't that be a young river? Wouldn't that be something that had been created quite quickly? We don't talk about it. Look at that. I mean, there were layers and layers and layers. How did that get washed out over millions and millions of years and flow uphill? How did that flow uphill? I want to know that. No one can give us a good explanation for it. These rivers, if they were created quickly from like a spillover from a lake, if that was created quickly, there would be a lot of damage, and we'd be able to replicate that. You can see this in civilization today. Here's a picture of a 1964 earthquake in Alaska, and it just destroyed this little town. There's a couple documentaries on it. It basically became mud, and it just smashed these buildings, just absolutely smashed them. Here's a little picture of it, the Turn Again Heights slide. So the pre-quake line was way up there at that dash line, and it all just dropped. It's amazing what water can do. Anybody remember Mount St. Helens? Are you old enough to remember Mount St. Helens? I was 6, so I remember this living in Stanton when it blew up. Very, very scary stuff. If you don't remember it, it was a massive volcano that blew up out in Washington. Here's a picture of it. There it was right before the explosion. Here it is after. Boom. Less than a day. Look at that thing. Look at it. The whole mountain just gone.
The ash came all the way across the United States and landed on
It did. I remember my stepdad talking about that. We were watching it on the news. We were living right off of North Augusta Street, and I don't remember the ash, but I remember him saying that, and I was scared, thinking, we're going to get this big cloud of ash and we're all going to suffocate. Because it was all over the news, you know. It was a big, big deal. Here's a picture of the actual explosion. So the whole north slope slid down, and then it was uncorked, and it released all that ash. Look, it's like half the mountain just gone. It was terrible. It was a terrible tragedy. And this, by some comparisons, is not a big volcano overall compared to some of the ones there. Look at that.
knocked down a lot of trees.
Yes, it did. And wait till we talk about Spirit Lake. That Spirit Lake is what really, Spirit Lake's one of those watershed moments for me, no pun intended, where the power of the flood, it became really obvious. You know, it was like, wait a second. I think some of these pictures were taken by people who were unfortunately killed, because there's no way they would have escaped this. Look at these cars. Oh, it's just terrible, you know? Oh yeah, okay, so there's a picture. I don't know what it's from, but from space, obviously. You can just see just pushing across, like you said, across the states. But I know you're right, though. I know it went, the ash from it, like, went all over the place. Okay, here's a picture of it. Here was, anywhere in the yellow was ½ inch of debris. Wow. Okay. Here's the May 18th, 1980 devastation chart right here. The red part is basically flow deposits, like basically hot magma, basically. And then the brown is the mud, and then everything else is like debris, and then, hash is debris too. But, it covered everywhere. Here's an example of it. Mount St. Helens was really small. It was 1 kilometer to the third power. Look at Tambora or Krakatoa. And Vesuvius, it was more than triple. So it's just an amazing thing. Here's some deposits that were made from it. Look at that. It's crazy. Here's the side where it exploded. That's what it looks like. It just flowed down there and it almost made basically like a new ridge line. You're talking about those trees. I think I got it in here. I'll get some more pictures. I want to get the Spirit Lake stuff, but look at that. I mean, just the power of that. Incredible. And remember, this was hundreds and hundreds of degrees, this mud. Mount St. Helens blew out enough material for everyone on Earth, the whole planet, to have 1 ton. Everybody. The hot mud flow covered blocks of ice that had been blown off the mountain because it was covered in ice. It's a really tall mountain. And so it blew that stuff off. See, there's a picture of it. And that was the ice that was up there. And so a river system formed in 9 hours. Okay, the landslide of May 18th buried the river and highway to Spirit Lake 100 feet. Okay? For 22 months, water had established a pathway to the lower waterways. In 9 hours, this mud flow carved a completely new set of canyons. And it reopened a way to the Pacific. 3 canyons were over 100 feet deep. One was nicknamed the Little Grand Canyon because it was a 1/40th scale model of the Grand Canyon. Just amazing. In just a quick amount of time right there. Let me show you. There's Spirit. Okay. Here's a picture of the canyon itself. 1,000 feet wide, carved instantly almost. 140 feet deep. That's just crazy. And once water starts to go over a dam, the erosion rate increases very rapidly. It just goes. Okay? And so that's what you get. Looks very familiar, doesn't it? There's the Yellowstone. There's the little Grand Canyon in Lumpkin, Georgia. Looks very similar. There's the Grand Canyon. Folks, this is a canyon. This was made by flow. This is not made over millions of years. They lied to us. They absolutely lied to us. Thousands of layers formed in just minutes. And I'm telling you, that little Colorado River, it did not make that Grand Canyon. There's absolutely no way it made that Grand Canyon. But it is proof of evolution to this day. They say it right here. Where's the picture of it? Over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. The only solid rock they need to be worried about is the solid rock of Christ, because they're missing it. And if you're a Christian and you're feeding kids this stuff, it'd be better for you than a lot of I'm just saying. But if we did have a dam down there, the Grand Canyon, which form a large lake. Wait a second. Over here.
So that's trees there?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Some of these are the trees. Some of these trees, I wish I had it in here. I thought I put it in here. But some of these trees were blown so far away that they landed in Spirit Lake and they deposited head up, or like with the root system down, because it's the heaviest part, right? So they get blown up, they hit Spirit Lake, blah, blah, they're rolling around in the water, and then they start settling down with gravity, and the root system goes right to the bottom. And then they get buried in the subsequent mud as it kind of, settles, And that's why you see, and we've seen pictures of this already, you see pictures of trees literally sitting all the way through layers of earth, and you're petrified. We've seen this. It's just a repeat of the same thing. Let's see. I want to make sure I get it. Yeah, look at these trees. Tons of them. Just blown away. Look at that. There's Spirit Lake. There's Mount St. Helens to the south. Look at the amount of trees blown into this thing through the sky. Unbelievable. It's just a repeat. Look at all those. Those are trees, folks. They're not toothpicks. Look at all that stuff. Just incredible what it did. And they all settled to the bottom. Look, there it is. That's what I wanted to see. That's crazy. Look at that. Unbelievable. Sticking right out of the water. Tons of it. They say there's like 20,000 there. Who knows? They're like buried in 15 feet of mud. So it looks like a forest in the bottom of it. Can you imagine what the world would have looked like after the flood? The amount of stuff that would have been buried and churned up. It's just very interesting. I think that you can see, yeah, here's some. Here's some stuff that's buried in coal layers. That's in France. Here's another one. This is in Germany. 7.6 meters, so what is that, 21 feet, 22 feet, something like that? Like that? Just buried right through the layers. Looks a lot like Spirit Lake, if you ask me. Here's one in Nova Scotia, Canada. Completely petrified. Here's a sketching of the ones in I won't attempt that, France, whatever it is. It's in France. Just tons of them all the way through the strata. Look at that. Here's petrified tree standing in Yellowstone. What if Yellowstone had part of that post-flood water just covering vast parts of it, and those trees settled down just like Spirit Lake? It's really hard to argue with the flood when you see stuff like this, but yet we don't talk about it. Here's ones on Specimen Ridge in Wyoming that have broken off roots and they extend through many layers. They didn't grow there. They're literally blown up there. And as it deposited, it all deposited with it. Here's trees that are made of stone, petrified trees in Arizona just laying out there. If it pleases the court, there wasn't a large forest out there a couple hundred years ago. That was obviously deposited maybe, 4,000 years ago after the flood. Here's another one. It's a postcard you can get. Petrified forest in Arizona. Where'd it come from? It's clearly wood. If it was deposited there and it took millions and millions of years, if it pleases the court, that wood have been blown away. It would have rotted in the sun and it would have turned to dust a long time ago, unless it was buried quickly in conjunction with a lot of water and mineral deposits that allows you to petrify things. Here's guys going up in Spirit Lake, Institute for Creation Research. You can actually call them and you can ask them about this stuff. I think that's kind of cool that you do that. Out there diving in Spirit Lake looking at stuff. Here's a layer of bark and organic debris. It's going to turn to coal if the conditions are right. Man. So doesn't it take millions of years to form coal? Do we have time? Yeah, we probably do. Let me get down here and catch up. I just like these pictures. These are amazing. Here in a lab, shown that you can make coal from heating wood, clay, and water at 150 degrees Celsius for 36 weeks. Coal can form quickly. You can form coal right now. Here's a floating mat of organic debris that if it were to get buried rapidly would create what? Peat. Anybody heard of peat? Like peat bricks? This is what they use. My family's, I have Scottish relatives or whatever, still do. And they burn this stuff for heat and for cooking. Pretty interesting. Here's a picture. Well, it's kind of hard to read that one. Let's skip one. Just talking about different strata. Eugenia Scott, who's the head of the National Science Foundation, National Foundation for Science Education, said there are 80 different separate layers of coal in the Midwest. And she's absolutely right. If you take a look at the amount of coal in the whole world, the entire mass of plants couldn't create that much fossil fuel. Okay? There had to be an enormous amount, she claims, of time to lay that down. Okay? She's claiming that it would take millions of years. She's assuming that the earth before the flood is just like it is now. It's not. I believe that the earth before the flood had a whole lot more land and a whole lot more biomass, a whole lot more plants and animals. So she's assuming something. In fact, here's a massive picture of a massive coal seam in Montana. It's right butting up against those Bighorn Mountains. Imagine if a bunch of stuff had been killed in the flood, plants, animals, and is floating around, and it got pushed up against the shore, and then it got buried by the other sediment, it would get compressed, and it would make coal. It's just interesting stuff. If it wasn't true, then how come we found, dinosaur tracks in coal in southeast Utah? How'd these tracks even get there? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Another picture of a gentleman in a coal seam with what looks to be apparently a tree buried. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop there because this is getting kind of technical, but we will pick it up. I'm not going to get finished this year, but it probably will be finished in January at some time. If you have questions, because I'm going to do like a review in the next section, please, 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 please give me your questions, and then I will go over them again if you have something you want to know about. If you don't care, then don't tell me anything. Okay, we'll go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for our salvation. Thank you for the truth in the Bible, that we can know these facts of creation, but more importantly, we can know whether or not we have a home in heaven when we trust Christ or His saving grace, His work on the cross, and not ourselves. Be with those folks still coming in and be with the services. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.